Hello and welcome. I'm Carmen Geddes, and today we're going to spread some Christmas cheer and make some darling homemade Christmas ornaments. And so the other thing we're highlighting is the wonderful 9-patch quilt block. This is probably the first block that I ever made, and this is a super versatile block that is used on so many different things. But the other thing we're going to do is we're working with little squares. So today we're going to be working with 1.5-inch squares for a 1-inch finished square. And so when I first sewed my 9-patch block, of course the squares were cut out and I painstakingly pinned and sewed those squares together to finish my block. Well, then strip piecing techniques came along where you could cut the strips, sew them together, subcut, and assemble these blocks so much simpler. Well, today we're going to kind of do the best of both of those worlds. We're still cutting out individual squares, but what we're going to piece on is a lightweight iron-on foundation called Easy Piecing Grid. So this is a fusible foundation. You see it has a grid printed on it. And so when we're going to piece on this foundation, we're going to turn this over and make sure that that bumpy or fusible side is up. Do you see how all of our fun little squares are already all cut out? And one of the things that I really like about piecing on a foundation is that we can go very, very scrappy, which I love. But the other thing that we can do is we can do these little fussy cuts. I'm going to put this guy in the middle. How cute is that? So you can fussy cut little motifs out. And so we're going to lay all these squares down. The other thing that we're going to talk about today is, as you can see, is we're not going to just make one at a time. Have you ever done a block exchange, or maybe we want to, in this case, we want to make several of these ornaments at a time. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to show you on my next piece, is we're actually going to lay out several blocks at a time. And I think my favorite part of this is that you get to see what this looks like before we start to sew. So on this one, you can see we didn't fill up the whole panel, but what I want you to notice as we've laid these down is I have a 9-patch, 9-patch, 9-patch. So do you see how it actually makes a really cute design if you just continued on for a whole quilt? But what I'm laying out are these individual 9-patch blocks. And so then, after all these squares are decided, you like where they all are, we're going to use a nice hot iron and we're going to fuse all of these down, which I already have done. And so when you're ready to sew, these are going to be all nice and fused, and then we're simply going to fold this on the fold line and sew your 1/4-inch seam. And so then on the next one, we're going to fold on the fold line and sew the 1/4-inch seam. But remember, we want all of these to end up individual blocks. And so on the seam that divides these two blocks, I'm going to put a pin, because I know you would never do this, but I have been known to fold on that line and sew it. So we don't want to do that. So fold on the fold line, sew your seam, and fold and sew your seam. So you see you're sewing through all the blocks, and we're going to skip. So then it becomes sew, sew, skip, sew, sew, skip, and sew, sew, and this will just be trimmed off. And then we're going to do the same thing going the other direction. So that after you sew this up, then what you get are all of these cute blocks all sewn up. Now, my previous had 9 blocks on it. This, since I've already made a few, this only has 4. But you see how this is all sewn on the front and the back. I love sewing with that foundation. You don't have any threads or raw edges. And because I skipped in between, you can do this with a rotary cutter, but I've actually just found it simpler with just a good pair of scissors. But because we did not sew this seam, we're just going to cut right between these two. And look how fun. Now we've got these 4 darling blocks, or the front of our ornaments, all done. Isn't that so fun? Check out that cute little fussy cut. So now we're going to put this together. And this is really simple. What I like about a project like this is I think this is something that the whole family can get involved in, and even the dads. But this is a really fun project for kids to learn how to sew. So we're going to cut out, we've got our, should I call it our quilt front? We have our ornament front, and we're going to cut out a back. It can be cut exactly the same size, or if you would like a little bit of wiggle room, you can actually cut out a square. If I can grab it, you can cut out a square that's a little bit bigger, and that's fine too, because sometimes it's a little bit easier to sew that way. What I like to do on the back of on the wrong side of the back piece, that's what I should call this, is I do just a regular iron-on interfacing, and I'm going to reinforce this, because that's just going to give this a lot more durability. And then on the front of our ornament, they kind of look the same. I have to feel to find out which one I have. You can use a regular piece of batting, but I used a fusible fleece. Now this is a really fun product because one side is fusible, and it's not like this needs to be warm. I just want to have a little bit extra body. So you can take that fusible fleece, put the fusible side to the wrong side, and fuse those, and then that's going to give it just a little bit of extra body. Now at this point, when this is all ready to go, before we put it all together, if you want to do any other, if you want to do some quilting on this on your sewing machine or even by hand, you're going to do it at this point before we assemble them. In fact, I'm just going to give this a little iron because we are going to assemble this. And there's a difference between ironing and pressing, and so ironing is really where we're moving that iron around, but I'm just kind of holding this iron in place because I just want to fuse it. So I'm going to just trim this excess. This is just like sewing a little pillow together, and so anybody can do it, and you can do it with any size. Now at this point, so I've got my quilt. This is my little quilt back. Let's move these out of the way. So many fun options. And so I've got my quilt back, and at this point we want to add our little ties. So we have to have something to hang them on the tree with. And what I used is just a little wrapping twine, but you could use ribbon, you could use all sorts of little things. And we want to attach this, and this is the point where we're going to decide, do we want these to be hung straight, so we'd put a little tie either, or do we want this to hang on the diagonal? And so on this one, I think because my little snowman is looking straight ahead, I'm going to use the glue pen, and I'm just putting a little dab of the glue because we want to hold these in place, and just a little dab. You can keep a little baby wipe handy when you're using glue sticks, because now at this point I'm kind of just like, I want that to be out of the way of the seam allowance, right? And so now we're going to lay our back on there, and these clips are so fun. But now, I know you would never do this, but I have been known to sew all the way around this and not leave myself an opening. And so what I'm going to do is, okay, let me find out where the bottom is. Okay, it's down here. So instead of the clips, I'm actually going to put a pin, and that's just as a reminder for me. It's like, oh, okay, Carmen, don't forget to leave a little opening here. We're going to sew this all the way around the edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can do a little back stitch if you want to. One thing I do like to do on the corners, I do kind of like to back stitch, and then I just pivot. I go back a little bit. Instead of just stopping at the corner and pivoting, I think it makes the corner a little stronger if I go back and then back up. And you can, and just make sure I'm still at that 1/4 inch. And And see, as I'm going around this, I can tell you right now that if I would have not, oops, I went too far. Let's just come back this way. If I had gone too far or too much talking and not put those pins down here in the end, I would have just sewn this right shut. You would not. There's my back stitch. So we're going to just go back. Oh, I keep pushing the wrong button. Let's back stitch. Nope, not that one. Let's back stitch, Carmen. There we go. All right. There's my back stitch. All right, and then this is where I want to stop. I'm going to do a little back stitch here. See, I made that look harder than it really is. All right, so now, one thing I like to do before I turn this inside out is I'm going to do just a little clip, not into the seam, right? We don't want to compromise that seam, but we're getting a little bit of the bulk out of those corners. And if you find you have like a lot left sticking out over the edges, you can kind of clean that up a little bit if you would like to, but this is going to be pretty straightforward. And so one little trick when you're turning, and especially something this little, right? Because it's just little. And so I'm going to reach in all the way and go to one of these outside corners and actually poke that corner through first. And it's a lot simpler than trying to kind of fold it over from the top to pull it through. And mostly it just needs to know that you are the boss of it. You're going to turn this inside out. Some awesome little turner tools that are going to make a big difference with these little corners. You want to be gentle on the corners when you're poking through. We're going to get all four corners. Isn't that already just turning out so cute? See, and everything we've done so far, pretty much everybody in the family could do. So wouldn't this be fun? Now you could do a little string of these to make a little banner. I do like to do a little thing on the corners when I'm turning. I grab each corner and I just give it a mighty little shake. And maybe it doesn't do any good, but I think it does. I think it just kind of helps those corners poke out. And then right here where this is going to get closed up, sometimes this can be a little bit hard to manage where that seam allowance and then you've got a little bit of batting. So I really like to bring in the glue, and we're just going to carefully get the glue on the seam allowance. See, we're putting that glue on the seam allowance right here on the inside. And see how I'm being nice and generous, because this is starch based. It's okay if it's staying in your quilt. This is a quilt. And your cute little ornament. And see, then I'm just going to pinch that shut. And then if you just put a little clip on there, you know, for 10 or 15 minutes or so, then that is going to dry, and it's going to make it really simple for you to do a little whip stitch, or you can sew the straight line on the sewing machine. But there you have it. So fun and fast, and we are ready for holiday decorating. So thank you so much for letting me show you this fun project. I hope that this gives you lots of ideas of what you can do with this 9-patch, and to not be afraid of little squares. If you want to have more information about Easy Piecing Grid, then if you search for my name on this channel, you're going to find that there are some other fun classes that you can go and watch with lots more information. If you want to find out more about me, my website is 10sisters.com, and I am Carmen Geddes Quilts on Facebook.